Hi, this is Guy Wallace. I started in learning and development way back in 1979, and I semi-retired in 2023. But my current mission as a semi-retired L&D professional is to help enterprise learning and development organizations become more performance-based. Welcome to my podcast. This episode is all about what I call APPOs, application exercises, otherwise known as practice with feedback. But I'm going to cover more than just APPOs. I'm going to cover all of the types of instructional activities that are part of my lesson mapping methodology. In my performance-based instructional design framework and thinking, in between any lessons open and close are instructional activities of three types: infos, or information, demos, or demonstrations, and APPOs, application exercises. Infos, demos, APPOs. And while they are delivered forward, information, demonstration, and application, they are designed and developed in a backward chain manner. First the APPOs, then the demos if necessary, and finally the information, the infos. The design post-analysis uses the analysis data indirectly and directly when articulating and designing these instructional activity types. The performance model and its capture of the ideal performance data, the outputs, the measures, the tasks, the roles and responsibilities, and the current state gaps against that ideal or aspirational performance is used to define the APPOs. I want my APPOs and the approach that I use to be what's called near transfer and not far transfer. If the application cannot be or cannot start out back on the job, where we're doing on-the-job training, under the watchful eye and feedback of some master performer of what is to be performed, and it has to happen inside a learning experience, away from the job, off the job, I want it to be more like training than education or communication like. I want it to mirror the real-world work as an exercise, as practice with feedback, or an application exercise, as I'm calling it, because APPO goes better with info and demo, don't you know? If you're going to review and approve or reject a loan application, you should have to do it in an APPO that uses a real loan application. If you can't do that on the job and you need to do that in a learning experience, you want it to follow the workflow, the work stream, or work processes and be as real as possible based on the work that's already been done from last week, if you can't use it in the workflow itself. And that somebody else has already completed that work, and so we're just going to use that stuff as fodder for an exercise that's authentic and enables near transfer. Again, trying to avoid far transfer experiences where things are not very close to what people will really be doing back on the job. But don't worry, we're sure you'll figure it out when you get there, and good luck with that. No, we want it to feel, smell, and sound like the real work. Is there noise in the background? Yeah, well, we'll need to replicate that too. We may not want to start there with the application exercise, with that noisy background, but eventually we may need to get there. As always, it depends. So, in my model, I see four possible types of APPOs: easy peasy, difficult, darn difficult, and from Hades. And not every application replication of the real work from back on the job needs an exercise from Hades, as the work back on the job may not be hellacious. Again, as always, it depends. But if the real work is hellacious, I need to get the learner to be able to get there and do that and master that to build their competence and confidence. So I need to ease them into the deep end of the pool, so to speak, slowly, with baby steps, to build that initial competence and confidence. Easy peasy leads to difficult, leads to darn difficult, and then leads to from Hades. Again, if that's what the real work looks like, feels like, smells like, back on the job. That last APPO, practice with feedback, can also be considered a performance test if it's authentic enough to the real work back on the job. I believe in performance testing over knowledge testing because the ability to recall or really recognize the right answer isn't what the job is all about. The job is to perform tasks to produce outputs that meet stakeholder requirements. The test should be one of those. Something where you have to do something and then your performance, your tasks can be assessed as well as the final output that you produce. Those two things are critical. The historical problem with L&D goes back a long way, long before I got into the business back in 1979. We all too often don't do any APPOs at all. No practice with feedback. Back in the day, the complaint was, back in the late 70s and early 80s, that we told too many war stories. Now, stories can be a part of an instructional design, but if war stories are some replacement, displacement of application exercises, practice with feedback, that ain't no good. I recall back at Motorola back in 1981 where the story was told that instructors were being encouraged by their students to tell us another war story because they wanted to avoid the practice with feedback. And maybe they were right. Maybe that practice with feedback was far transfer. It had little or nothing to do with their job back on the job, and they knew that. And so they didn't want to waste their time. And in fact, they may have gotten more benefit from additional war stories than lame practice with feedback. But we all too often don't do any APPOs. Or if we do it one and done. And sometimes, not all the time, that's insufficient to build the competence and confidence of the learners who are really performers first and foremost. So we use the analysis data from our performance model with data on the ideal performance, the outputs, the measures that reflect stakeholder requirements, the tasks that need to be performed, the roles and responsibilities in case this is not a solo effort in performance back on the job, but is a collaboration or a team effort with other people, with other roles, with other job titles. We need to address that and the gaps that we've uncovered to help us define the application exercise. Again, if it's going to be authentic, if it's going to be real, it has to carry forward all of the warts and the problems and difficulties from back on the job, because that's what we're trying to prepare people to perform in, that real world authentic performance back on the job. Then, after the APPOs, we need to decide if we need a demo or two. We sometimes don't need these if the target audience are all incumbent performers and they already know what this looks like. I have my design team, a subset of the analysis team, composed of master performers and other subject matter experts, decide that, and things like that, during design. I mean, they know best, or at least they always know better than any learning and development professional would know, who's never done that job for a living. And they've come from that. That's why we're using them. We want that real world authentic. We get it. We understand not only the surface stuff that you L&D people may have discovered and documented, we understand the nuances behind that. We know this thing in layers, much deeper than any learning and development professional could ever get to unless they went back out to that job and did that job for a sufficient amount of time to leave that with an understanding of all of the nuances of the performance context and the performance requirements. Do we need a demo? Yes or no? Do we need more than one demo? Because the variances back on the job for this performance vary tremendously, and we need to show all of that. Do we need a demo that's at regular speed, or do we need a demo that's a slow mo? demo at slow motion, so we can slow things down so that they're easier to see, because as we all should know by now, the hand is quicker than the eye. Do we need a demo that's at regular speed with slow-mo and with maybe start-stop capabilities to enable us or some technology to point out the key aspects of the performance context or the performance response that we're trying to help learners learn? After all, the performance context may offer overt or covert clues and cues about if and how to vary the performance response. Most performance that's worthy of L&D is not rote, and we should not treat it as such. After we've articulated the APPO and any demos, we use the analysis data on enabling knowledge and skills to inform the design of one or more infos to precede the demos and then the APPOs in the flow of a performance-based lesson map, which is my format for design of modular lessons inside modular learning and development events. I've been doing this since 1990 this way. Infos need to be the classic MVP, minimally viable product, or maybe just the minimal product that's viable in conveying only what the learner needs to understand the demo and then be successful in the APPOs, and no more, the minimal content. Less is more, because more is TDM, too damn much, or too darn much, or too dang much. Take your pick, but in any event, avoid TDM. Now, a lesson map in my approach may have one or more infos leading to a demo or two, and then an APPO or four, followed by another chain of infos, demos, and APPOs. I may be doing cycles, adding new information, and then a new demonstration that demonstrates that new information in the work process, the work stream, or workflow. And then practicing that in a new APPO, or two, or three, or four. I may use interweaving of new APPOs that add in performance from a prior lesson into this lesson's chain of infos, demos, and APPOs. Oh, and I've previously warned my clients that my design would likely have some 60% of the time in practice and feedback, so that they don't freak out later when they meet me in a formal gate review meeting at the end of the design phase and see the design in order to approve it, amend it, or reject it. One of the rules, I forget which number it is, maybe it's rule number 9 or something, is to allow no surprises. So I preempted this surprise about that design and how it will look a certain way. Of course, I did that in the gate review meeting in the analysis phase previously, when I already had something in mind and could see what and where the design would likely look like and include, and how much time it might take. For more information about my lesson mapping methodologies and infos, demos, and APPOs, you can see them in several of my books, which I'll add to the show notes. But you can also see them in several of my YouTube videos that are free that I've covered this approach, both when I've done the design after the analysis effort and a review by the client, or concurrent with the analysis effort, which is sometimes much better an approach for smaller scale L&D products. Most of my work as a consultant have been on large scale things and not mini modules, micro learning, if you will. And you can search online on several of my websites for even more free content about lesson mapping and information, demonstration, and applications. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.